When you talk about some of the biggest trades in the 21st century, you have to talk about the trade that sent Anthony Davis from the New Orleans Pelicans to the LA Lakers in the summer of 2019. That same summer, the Pelicans got lucky in the 2019 draft lottery, and they were supposed to take the next generational prospect in Zion Williamson with the number one overall pick. They did that, which jump started their rebuild and gave them a nice head start, having this nice young piece to build around in Zion. All the assets they got in return for Anthony Davis, which was an absolute haul. Josh Hart, Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball being the players, and a plethora of draft picks. And here we are in the 2025 season with injuries just decimating this current Pelicans team. And it just feels like that they are underachieving in their rebuild, which wasn't even a total teardown. It's not something like we've seen from the Washington Wizards, the Brooklyn Nets, the Portland Trailblazers in the past. This was supposed to be a soft rebuild. And now we're 6 years into the post Anthony Davis Pelicans era, and this team has zero playoff wins to show for it. So what is going on, everybody? How is everybody doing today? I basically just want to talk about what the Pelicans have kind of underachieved in the post Anthony Davis era. Obviously this year they've just been decimated by injuries like I mentioned before. They're 5-22 current day. They're currently last in the Southwest Division, currently last in the Western Conference, and have the second worst record in the NBA behind the Washington Wizards, who are actively trying to tank and pretty much get Cooper Flag in the 2025 NBA draft. This is a completely different story for the New Orleans Pelicans, and we're just gonna kind of walk things back and just see where we've gone to this point. So the 2019 Pelicans finished with a 33-49 record. Throughout the middle of the year, we kind of knew that Anthony Davis wasn't going to re-sign with the Pelicans, which basically lost New Orleans all their leverage in a trade. Now, Anthony Davis was still one of the best players in the NBA. He was one of the elite two-way big men in the league and was always kind of hovering on the door. Will this be his MVP season? Will he kind of emerge as the number one player in the NBA? Now, that never really came true, but he still became a really good player in terms of being a top five player, and we knew what he meant to the Lakers 2020 championship team. So they trade Anthony Davis in the summer of 2019, and this was a lackluster Pelicans team. So I do agree this was the right move. It was basically a three-team trade that got the Washington Wizards involved, and the Pelicans were able to get the number 4 overall pick in the 2019 draft. They traded that to Atlanta to trade down. They got Lonzo Ball, Josh Hart, Brandon Ingram, a 2022 first-round draft pick from the Lakers, which ended up being Dyson Daniels, someone that is currently breaking out on the defensive end of the floor this year, but just not with the Pelicans. They also received 2 future draft picks as well, and they used one in this past offseason to trade for DeJounte Murray, a player we're going to get to in a little bit. So the first year with this team, they draft Zion Williamson with the number 1 overall pick. They also get Jackson Hayes in the lottery and Nickeil Alexander-Walker right outside the lottery, and this team ends up going 30-42 in the shortened COVID year. Zion didn't get to start off the year. He was hurt. This team still had Drew Holiday on the team. Brandon Ingram ended up dropping 24 points per game in his first full year in New Orleans. And I think we all knew that Brandon Ingram, with the right opportunity, more volume coming his way, could definitely break out as a 3-level wing scorer in this league. He wins most improved player in 2020. He averages 24 points. Zion only appears in 24 games, but had an electric NBA debut. He dropped 22.5 points throughout 24 games in his rookie season. They got good contributions out of Josh Hart. Lonzo Ball was taking steps in the right direction, especially with his outside shot. Drew Holiday was still one of the better two-way guards in the league, and they had solid veterans around that core at times like JJ Redick, Derek Williams, Etuan Moore, but had some nice underrated young assets, including Nickeil Alexander-Walker I just mentioned, and a young Kenrich Williams. This seemed like a step in the right direction for the New Orleans Pelicans as they were building up one of the more premier young cores in the league. They didn't have as much draft capital as somebody like the Oklahoma City Thunder did, but they looked like the next best case in terms of young futures in the Western Conference and in the NBA. Now, they pivoted from Alvin Gentry, from their head coach, going into the 2021 season. They hired Stan Van Gundy, which was kind of a shocker at the time. He was a former Miami Heat, Orlando Magic, and more recently a Detroit Pistons head coach, and that just lasted 1 year for the New Orleans Pelicans. And in the 2020 offseason was one of their big mistakes as well. They were looking to add some more guards to this team. They had a lot of wings that I talked about, like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Zion, Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart, Kenrich Williams. So in the 2020 draft, they decided to look at the point guard market, and they took Kyra Lewis out of Alabama when there were some better guards on the board. And in hindsight, Cole Anthony definitely would have been a better pick on draft night, but obviously a couple picks later, 8 picks later, Tyrese Maxey, the point guard, combo guard out of Kentucky, went to the Philadelphia 76ers. He went on to be an all-star in this league, while Kyra Lewis is still struggling to find an NBA roster spot just a few years later. The 2021 Pelicans under Stan Van Gundy got off to an abysmal start. They ended up finishing up 31-41 in the shortened 2021 NBA season that was only 72 games. And a deal they didn't need to make, but honestly, they did get a lot in return for him, and they traded away Drew Holiday, who was the longest tenured Pelican at the time, in November of 2020, and it ended up being stretched out to a 4-team trade, and they basically just got a boatload of draft picks from the Milwaukee Bucks. And they were also able to get Steven Adams in this trade as well, which was a nice throw, and they were able to get him from the Oklahoma City Thunder, a team that was involved in this trade. But they did also include Kenrich Williams going to OKC in this trade, who today is currently one of the more underrated defenders in my opinion, and is a good rotational piece on the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I will give them credit too, in that 2021 season, they found an undrafted diamond in the rough on a two-way that they were able to convert into a multi-year contract. You know him today because he's a very good piece of the Dallas Mavericks, who signed a nice contract with them last offseason, and that is Najee Marshall. And he was just a nice energy spark plug guy in 32 games in that 2021 season for New Orleans. They go into the 2021 NBA draft, and they do a good job in this draft. They trade down with the Memphis Grizzlies. They basically get Jonas Valanciunas. They send Steven Adams over to Memphis. They take on Eric Bledsoe in a salary dump, and they drafted Trey Murphy after trading down, which was a phenomenal pick out of Virginia, and they also got Herb Jones in the second round. This was a very good draft by Trenton Langdon, the GM at the time, and David Griffin, the president of basketball operations. They go into the 2022 season. They finished 36-46. They just missed out on the Western Conference playoffs in the play-in tournament, but they had a nice foundation on this team. But something they made in the middle of the year was a questionable trade. They were trying to get in the playoffs around Zion Williamson, around Brandon Ingram going into the year, and then Zion was out throughout this whole season due to injury, which is something that has just been plaguing the Pelicans since they drafted him back in 2019. And they traded away Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who was emerging to being a good defensive wing. He didn't really reach his offensive ceiling that we thought we saw at Virginia Tech. They also sent him with Josh Hart and a couple other players, including some draft capital, to Portland in exchange for Tony Snell, Larry Nance Jr., and CJ McCollum, which definitely felt like a rush trade at the time for New Orleans. And in that 2021 offseason, they let Lonzo Ball go to the Chicago Bulls in a sign and trade. They pivot and do a sign and trade with the Charlotte Hornets for Devontae Graham. And at that time, this was looked at as a head-scratching move to let Lonzo Ball walk, as he was someone that was a great defender, just made his teammates better around him, and was turning into an elite three-point shooter at the point guard position. Great defender, as I mentioned. Maybe with hindsight, they made the right decision, because Lonzo, even though he played great to start off that 2022 season with the Bulls, he obviously suffered some career-threatening injuries at the time, even with Chicago investing all that money into him. They did that late in the offseason. They signed Jonas Valanciunas to an extension, and with all that missing the playoffs, they did draft Dyson Daniels in the first round in this draft, which was the pick from the LA Lakers, but they never really gave Dyson a full chance to start. Obviously, there was so much talent on this Pelicans team. He didn't really have a chance to emerge in his first 2 years as an offensive option, and we're just seeing the move they made this past offseason, trading away him with Larry Nance Jr. and 2 future first-round picks for DeJounte Murray. And I don't think this team is this bad because of DeJounte Murray. That is unfair to DeJounte because of all the injuries they've had. And basically, 2023, they finished 42-40. They missed out on the playoffs once again. In 2024, they do make the playoffs last year, but Zion Williamson gets hurt again in the play-in tournament when he was playing some of the best and healthiest basketball of his career. And that leads us to current day, where they are 22 losses in the loss column through their first 27 games. They are one of the worst teams in the NBA in terms of every metric. Now, it's not because of their play, and this is now year 4 under Willie Green, but this team has definitely failed to reach expectations from that Anthony Davis trade back in 2019. That could be because of trading for DeJounte Murray, investing maybe way too much into Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson without just ever really seeing them play a decent sample size together, because they both come with their injury concerns. They trade away Josh Hart and Nickeil Alexander-Walker for CJ McCollum. Obviously, the most recent trade, getting DeJounte Murray from the Atlanta Hawks after watching the Atlanta Hawks make the same mistake a few off seasons ago back in 2022 when they gave up noticeable draft capital for Murray from the San Antonio Spurs. And this team has had its draft misses, but it's also hit on some picks as well. Like, I want to give them credit for Herb Jones in the second round. Phenomenal pick, as Herb is one of the best defenders in the NBA, trading down in 2021 to get Trey Murphy at 17, while the Grizzlies, a smart organization, trade up to get Zaire Williams, and that didn't work out. They kind of had a carousel of centers around Jonas Valanciunas, and they are definitely missing one right now. this season because they traded away Larry Nance Jr. in the offseason. Valanciunas goes to Washington. They're asking so much out of Yves Missi, who I like a ton and I think has impressed me a ton in his rookie season, but we're just going to be relying way too much on a pretty raw rookie coming out of Baylor that wasn't even a lottery pick in a weak draft and has been their best player this year in terms of win shares because of all the injuries they've had. They made a nice draft pick on Jordan Hawkins in the 2023 draft, and it's just a shame we're probably never going to see this Pelicans team at its full strength unless we see Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram and Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, Jordan Hawkins, CJ McCollum, DeJounte Murray, everybody on the floor at the same time. And with all these injuries, with Zion also just having an uncertain return and is still out indefinitely, just draws another red flag as there's a clause in Zion's contract where the Pelicans now can cut him and they don't have to pay him anything on the rest of his contract. That would definitely come with some backlash because he is supposed to be your franchise player and that's what you drafted him and invested all this money into him back in the 2019 draft. But with Brandon Ingram being a free agent at the end of the year, you are 17 games under 500 in a loaded Western Conference. You may not even make the play-in tournament this year, and the odds are likely that you're not going to. And Brandon Ingram is a free agent at the end of the year. He turned down noticeable money by you guys in the past, and they don't want to commit a max contract to Brandon Ingram, and I don't blame them. I don't think he's worth that $200 million contract that he may get. He's a good player, but he has his injury concerns, and can he be one of your top two paid guys as you are trying to win a championship in today's modern NBA? And it's tough because Zion Williamson just hasn't stayed healthy. CJ McCollum is getting up there in age, still making a decent amount of money this year and next year. DeJounte Murray's making a decent amount of money, and he's going to be under contract for the next couple of years. And is he much of a ceiling raiser rather than a floor raiser? That's yet to be determined here in New Orleans. So I do wonder at the end of this year, does Willie Green kind of get an unfair firing after probably finishing his fourth year in New Orleans without a winning playoff series? I think that is unfair to him because this team is not underperforming because of skill and because of coaching. It's because of injuries. They had to pick up Elfrid Payton off the street and he got 20 assists in a game. And I would say this year could maybe be a blessing in disguise like Memphis last year. I know it was just so unlucky for Memphis after riding high after that 23 season to have all those injuries last year, but you got to see G.G. Jackson play a ton and figure out what you had in him. Same with Vince Williams, and you were able to get Zach Edey with the 9th overall pick. I know you traded away the Lakers pick this year, as the Pelicans did, and they traded away a future Bucks pick in that DeJounte trade, but they do own their first round pick in a good NBA draft. You had a Dylan Harper, maybe a Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey, Kasperi Shakushanis, Igor Demin, one of these guys to this team, and you have a good foundation because maybe you got something in Brandon Boston Jr., maybe you got something in Antonio Reeves or Trey Jamison, and one of these guys can show that they could be a rotational piece going forward. Maybe Jeremiah Robinson Earl as well, and you basically trade away Brandon Ingram for a couple more assets. Not a bad idea. I'm also not opposed to re-signing Brandon Ingram, but it's definitely going to hurt you against the luxury tax because you have the Murphy contract extension kicking in next year, and I think you really just got to figure out what you're doing with Zion Williamson. So I wonder if they're going to make any changes to the coaching staff, to the front office staff, and I wonder if you Pelicans fans agree with me that it's been disappointing in their soft rebuild since they traded away Anthony Davis in the summer of 2019, and they have yet to win a playoff series since. So that's gonna be it for me. Hope you guys did enjoy. Just kind of wanted to talk about New Orleans Pelicans basketball today in kind of a macro view and just see where they're going to be headed, because you know what? It's not terrible of a team. It's pretty good. You have an elite defender in Herb Jones. I know you traded away Dyson Daniels. That's going to hurt, but Trey Murphy's a good player. Jordan Hawkins is a good player. You still have good young pieces on this team. You still have the Brandon Ingram trade piece. You have some draft capital going forward, including your first round pick this year and a good 2025 draft. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below, Pelicans fans and non-Pelicans fans. I would really appreciate it if you drop a thumbs up, subscribe if you're not already. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.